Hey, good morning. Hopefully, you had a good weekend. This is Mr. Everett's back with you. I just wanted to go over an intro to wild edibles and our general rules that I'd like you to follow as we go. The first few slides here we'll talk about in class later this week. So, just why we're going to learn about them, what benefits they are, harvesting your own versus buying them in the store, what kind of chemicals we use, and then why we might want to pick the ones that have more organic chemicals instead. But I want to cover these general rules for our wild edibles. So first off, positive ID is going to be super important. So I have an example here where I have wild grape and Virginia creeper in that person's hands. And just looking at the berries themselves, they look really similar. So we just can't go around and saying, well, that looks like a wild grape, I'm going to go ahead and taste it. That's not what we're going to be doing in this class. So we need to have positive ID. So things to look for are the botany terms we kind of talked about. So alternate or opposite leaves. What's the vein structure doing? The leaf structure itself. Is it a compound leaf? Is it whorled? Is it a simple leaf? What's going on? So we want to use all those things to help us identify before we even decide that we want to try something. So some resources. That Seek app that we talked about last week, that's really great. You just point your camera at some leaves or the fruit or the flower, kind of move it around until it can get you a positive ID down all the way to the species. The iNaturalist app itself, that you take a picture and upload it, and I'll give you suggestions to what it could be. And then some field guidebooks that we have here on campus that you can check out and look at as we go through our unit. So positive ID is going to be super important for us. We don't want to eat anything that is either an irritant or can do some damage to our digestive system. So second off, we need to know when and what parts are edible for our plant. So not all the parts are edible. So if you have an example, the rhubarb on the bottom there, we have the stem that is edible, and if, you dip it in some sugar, it's a good summer treat. But the leaves are poisonous. So just because one part of the plant is edible doesn't mean the whole thing is going to be edible. So be really careful. Double check to see what parts are edible, what parts are not. And then up on the right there, that's wild asparagus. Wild asparagus you harvest in the spring before it gets big and kind of fluffy on the top. And this time of year, there's these red berries. So we have to harvest wild asparagus in the spring, and we can't eat the red berries. So just because, again, you can eat something at one time of the year and not the other, or what parts are edible and what parts are not, are going to be super important. So make sure you ID and double check which parts are edible and when we would harvest them. So next, avoid bitter tasting plants. So over time, plants have evolved a defense mechanism. Some are bitter, and that tells us that we shouldn't be eating them. So our body is also designed to tell us what is good and what is bad when we eat. So in general, avoid bitter tasting plants. The problem with this one is that you have to taste it, which I don't want you going around just tasting it. But if you make an ID and it's bitter, spit it out, and we shouldn't be eating that. So next, we want to avoid plants that have a milky sap. So again, over time, plants need to develop some defense mechanisms so they don't go around and just get eaten all the time. So most of these milky sap are poisonous. There's going to be a couple examples in class that we talk about where this isn't true. But in general, you pick something, you harvest something, you cut something, and it's leaking that white milky sap. You're not going to want to eat it. So just be careful with that. So next, collect only the parts you need. So just because you want to harvest a plant and you only need, let's say, the leaves, we don't need to harvest the whole entire individual plant. So collect only what you need, and then our general rule is going to be leave at least a dozen others behind. So if you come to a spot and you see a few individual plants and you have to harvest the whole thing, we want to find a different location. So we want to conserve. We want to make sure that next generations have enough opportunity to do the same kind of thing. So only if they're in abundance, take it. So like here, the dandelion field, there's a lot of individuals there, so you're probably okay harvesting some. But our rule is leave at least a dozen others behind. Know and recognize poisonous plants is going to be our next general rule. So poison ivy is a big concern here, especially on our campus. A couple of years ago, someone had a pretty severe breakout from the oil on the poison ivy plant. So we want to be careful. We want to ID. We want to look ahead of where we're walking to see if there's any poison ivy in front of us. Some people, I think less than like 15% of the population is not allergic to the oil on poison ivy, but if you don't know, we don't want to find out because it's not pleasant. So the next plant on the right is buckthorn. That's also on our list that is not edible, but I want you to be able to recognize it. So we'll check it out. I'll show you the features of that. But both of those things, poison oak, poison sumac, also are not edible, and they're poisonous. And I just want you to be able to identify those. So if you're out in the woods or out in a field, later you're able to determine, well, I shouldn't walk through that big patch of poison ivy, or if your dog's running ahead of you, try to keep your dog near that poison ivy. Another one, collect only the common edibles and the ones in abundance. So please do not collect here at Anoka on campus. I have this example here. This is Solomon seal. I think I only know about 2 of these plants here on campus. So if someone comes through and harvests them, then they're gone. So I want to make sure that you only collect the common ones and ones in abundance. So that kind of goes along with that other rule, leave 12 behind. And also, this part goes with know what's edible. This entire plant is not edible. The berries are not edible. So we want to know exactly what we can and cannot eat on those plants. Number 8, some non-edible plants resemble edible ones. This is by no mistake, where they know what is and what isn't edible, so they kind of want to mimic that. So make sure you have a positive ID. So morel versus false morel mushrooms. These are really tasty treats. The morel mushrooms are in the springtime. And if you look on the right side of that picture, they kind of resemble each other. So morels are tasty, false morels are poisonous to us. So we just can't go around harvesting things that kind of look alike without a positive ID. So again, make sure you have a couple sources and you have your positive ID to make sure you're eating the correct thing. And you're not going around just picking random stuff that might look like something. The berries, the wild grape I showed earlier too, they resemble each other, but one is edible and the Virginia creeper is not. So we just have to be careful with that. Also on the right, I threw in there, those are strawberries. They kind of resemble poison ivy. So again, we have to know, am I dealing with poison ivy or am I dealing with a strawberry plant? And they're at certain times of the year fairly easy to kind of mess up there. So we want to make sure we have a positive ID for the non-edible plants. Number 9, we can't use animals as an indicator as to what is edible. They have different digestive systems. They've evolved to rely on some of these plants. So here's a couple examples of animals eating poison ivy. So we have a goat on the left. They were using that for poison ivy control. They can walk through it. They can eat it without any reaction to it. So just because a squirrel's down eating a mushroom or something, we can't say, well, that squirrel's eating it, so I think I should be able to eat it. So we can't use animals as an indicator. And then on the right side, that's a cardinal eating poison ivy berries also. So we can't use them. Don't use them. Use your field guides in your apps instead. Number 10, this one's important. Avoid fungi and avoid white berries. So I showed you the picture of that Solomon seal earlier. I showed you just on the last slide, the cardinal eating poison ivy. Those were white berries. And here there's dogwood. Those are white berries as well. So when you walk in the supermarket, you don't see white berries, advertised. You can't buy them in the supermarket that I'm aware of because in general, the white berries tell you stay away, I'm poisonous. And then fungi, we're not going to collect fungus or mushrooms in this class either. So there's some that are easy to identify, but we're not going to kind of mess around with that. I don't think these are in Minnesota, but I just wanted to kind of show you the severity. Those are death cap mushrooms. And if you slice the death cap mushroom and get into the stem there, and then use that same knife to cut a steak later, that's enough poison to kill you within 30 minutes. So fungus, mushrooms, are not going to mess around with in this class. There's just a little bit too many unknowns with those. And lastly, eat small amounts of wild edibles. So your body's not used to them. We're used to having the food we buy from the store. So don't go around, eating as much as you can from these wild edibles. So if you really wanted to, and you're positive, and we're all together, and you want to try it, a little bite is okay, but I don't want you to go around harvesting all kinds of wild edible plants. So that's what I got for you, the rules. I'm excited to get to work tomorrow with the people that are going to be in class. So enjoy your day.